Welcome back to 52 Lockup. I am your Appletini Cadma. 52 Lockup is a series I started talking about one of my biggest passions. True crime. A new episode every Cadmaniac Monday or every Cadmaniac week. 52 Mondays, 52 weeks, 52 crimes. So I hope you guys are enjoying. Be sure to like, leave some feedback, subscribe, of course. And as always, viewer discretion is advised. So we are going to head out to Missouri. Yeah, guys, that's where we're going today. So 1981 born Jennifer Ann Hall has been making headlines as of lately. When I say headlines, I mean like Charles Cullen kind of headlines, you know, like one of those. So Jennifer Ann Hall, is a former, respiratory therapist. Now, some of you may be like, respiratory therapist, like, what do they do? So let me explain. So respiratory therapists are certified medical professionals who treat the respiratory system. The human body, right? The system is, broken up into two parts, right? You have your upper respiratory system, which includes your nose, the nasal cavity, your mouth, right? The pharynx, which is your throat, larynx, which is your voice box, right? The lower part consists of your trachea, right? The lungs, and then the bronchi that breaks out, right? Bronchioles, etc., right? So respiratory therapists take a specialized look, you know, they're looking into your lungs, and they help to treat any respiratory problems a person may come across, whether it's acute or whether it's chronic. And please understand, these respiratory therapists, they're not doctors, but they are a crucial part of the healthcare team, just like everyone else, right? Everyone's in a team. They're like, okay, we're gonna figure out, whoa, Bundy! That's the goal, okay? There are a bevy of reasons why a person may need to see a respiratory therapist, which can include having COPD, which is the acronym for chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, asthma, acute respiratory distress syndrome, which is like an onset issue for a person who may have like contracted COVID-19 or other respiratory infections, right? Bronchitis, emphysema, cystic fibrosis, sleep apnea, spinal muscular dystrophy, Parkinson's disease, Lou Gehrig's disease. I mean, even babies who are born prematurely before, their lungs are completely developed, these would be the people who would be like, hey, I'm going to assist the doctor to see what I see because I specialize in this, right? Even people who have been in emergencies who suffered trauma that prevents this person from breathing on their own. You know what I mean? Part of their job can even include, intubating a person, which is inserting a tube, right, through the mouth, down the windpipe, down the trachea, because you want to make sure this person is breathing, right? They will monitor your breathing and other vital signs while you're on the ventilator. They'll also monitor things, especially like your blood saturation levels, right? Blood oxygen saturation levels, to make sure that you stay within 95 to 100%, right? So if a person, if you suffer from like COPD, your baseline is maybe a little bit lower than 95%, but nevertheless, they're going to know what's your average, and then they're going to start gauging whether it's below and if this is going to become problematic. They will test a person's tidal volume, which is the depth of their inhalation, right? And, each breath generally will contain about 500 to 600 milliliters of air. They're monitoring how many times you're breathing, whether you're breathing fast, right? Because the average adult is expected to breathe around between 12 to 20 breaths per minute, depending on each person, right? So they want to know if your breathing is like, if it's shallow, if it's labored, and you're hyperventilating over there. They want to make sure your body is getting the oxygen. I mean, permanent brain damage starts to occur as quickly as 4 minutes. Without oxygen, death can occur, right, between those 4 to 6 minutes. If necessary, the respiratory therapist will provide respiratory medications, generally through a mist, like a nebulizer or a dry powder. Other inhalers could be like, albuterol, Symbicort, which are bronchodilators, right? They open up the broncho, there we go, to help open the airways, right? They also will administer corticosteroids, antihistamines, as well as epinephrine. I want to paint a good picture of how vital Jennifer's job is to the team, and particularly what she's allowed to do. So becoming a respiratory therapist is around 73 credit, kind of full-time student schooling kind of thing. It takes about roughly 2 years, maybe a little more, depending on what you're doing, right? So here we are. We got 135-pound, 5'5", 20-year-old Jennifer Ann Hall, born to Debbie and Don Hall. She would be working at Cass County Medical Center in Harrisonville, Missouri. However, on January 24th, 2001, Jennifer would be the only on-duty respiratory therapist. She states later that she was getting a soda from her truck because she knew later she was going to be observing a patient while they were sleeping, and she knew she wouldn't have the time to get her soda. So she's like, I'm going to go get this real quickly. So she's in there, she's getting her soda, she's grabbing it, and then, whoa! Alarms go off, right? So her and two other employees, Violet Warren and Mark Berry, hear the fire alarm, and they're running to protocol, which is to make sure that, you know, the patients are going to be okay, locking up places where the fire is, et cetera, right? So they would run to basically turn off also the oxygen valve in the rooms to prevent an explosion from occurring. I mean, oxygen is not flammable, but it's fun. So any fires, obviously involving oxygen, like I said, will, mind blown. So it's imperative that they turn off that valve, right? So it's reported that during this dashing run, Mark Berry would lose his balance, right? And he would bump into Jennifer Ann Hall, right? Jennifer Ann Hall. She instinctively, what do you do when you're falling? You catch yourself. She would touch the hot metal door frame to catch her balance, and she would burn her hand. The hospital fire would cause $23,000 in damage. So an investigation ensues, right? They're trying to figure it out. They notice Jennifer's hand is a little charred. She tries to explain about the fall. But they also noticed that near the fire, there was an unusual amount of charred paper. It would be about roughly 3 weeks, maybe a month later, that the fire investigators would conclude that the fire was intentionally set by Jennifer. So she would be now arrested and charged with first-degree arson. Private attorney Gary Cover of Clinton, Missouri, would be hired by her parents, right, to defend their daughter. It's actually a recommendation from the cousin, right? So Gary fails to examine, basic evidence, and apparently during the trial routinely mix up facts, dates, and names at the trial. It was even pitched to the jury by the prosecution that she had set the fire in an effort to gain attention for her heroic attempt to extinguish it, right? However, the prosecution also slips in that her motive was due to her unhappiness about the ending result, about a sexual harassment claim that she filed against a coworker who had passed away 2 weeks ago from a heart attack. That seems like a stretch. But is it though? Is that why she set the fire? Anyway, the coworker basically just got a slap on the hand, and that is it. She was pissed about it. Anyone would be, right? But either way, Jennifer would be convicted of second-degree arson. So now, by the way, the day of her sentencing, attorney Gary Covers hey, if you just you might receive a more favorable sentence if you just took responsibility for the fire. So during this sentencing, she would falsely claim that she had dropped a lit cigarette and started the fire accidentally, right? She would be quoted later that she has never even smoked. That makes sense, right? Because she's a respiratory therapist. I presume if you're a respiratory therapist, you're probably going to avoid smoking, right? So Jennifer would be sentenced to 3 years in prison. And she would spend her time at Women's Maximum Security Prison in Vandalia. Now, she shared her cell with 4 other inmates. She joins in on July 5th, 2003. Even on her first day, she's so scared of being in prison that one of the other inmates is like, just act like you've been here before and nobody will mess with you, right? Now, one of the other reasons why she was scared of being in there is because Vandalia's medical care team at that particular prison was recently publicized for mixing up medications the previous summer, which apparently caused a dozen inmates to be hospitalized. That's how severely they messed up the medications. Her parents were not happy with attorney Gary Cover. So they're like, that's it. We're getting Matt O'Connor. He's going to handle our daughter's appeal, right? The new attorney would call in forensic specialist Carl Martin to re-examine the evidence and would quickly discover, and according to him, that there was definitive proof that was severely overlooked by law enforcement. Carl had spotted a photo that showed an electrical short in a cord on an old clock. So Carl does his Fletcher Reed thing. If you don't get that reference to the movie, just work with me still. To the conclusion that the charred papers found on the floor near the fire came from a file tray that was on top of the computer terminal and melted due to the heat and spilled its contents onto the floor, which caused the fire. So now here we are. All this is going on. The jury goes for it. July 23rd, 2004, she's released from prison. It's appealed. So, due to her constant seizures, right, in the prison, because of what happened during that time, her attorney, Matt O'Connor, was faxing in her epileptic medication to the prison every day because he was like, I don't want any mix-ups, right? He's like, I'm on to you guys, right? He was fighting for her that hard because she's telling him, if I die, this is who did it. She's panicking. She's on edge. She's like, I flat out told him, I think I'm going to die in here. Bad things can happen there. You wouldn't believe what people can make into a weapon. I mean, this is all intense before she finally gets out. I mean, even her parents are struggling to maintain not only her medical bills, but the legal bills as well. Her father, Don, he was an employee at Kansas City Fire and Security, while her mother, Debbie, worked as an assistant at an Overland Park dentist's office. Both her parents took night jobs answering the phone for Pizza Hut's delivery line. Like, her parents are really, they're working it to the bone. And even though she got out, she would be tried again. Because the prosecution was like, nah. You let her out? No. They're pissed, right? So now, they know she's not going to do any additional jail time. But they were like, nah. We're not letting this one get away, right? February 2005, right? She's completely acquitted. She ended up leading a federal lawsuit against her previous defense attorney, right? To recover at least $100K, right? To cover the fees that were paid to them. But the case would be dismissed, and I couldn't find if it was actually settled or like what the issue was. But anyways, now it gets juicy. According to Out of the Fire, the Jennifer Hall story published by Nadia Palom, I'm so sorry if I butchered the name. But during Jennifer's tenure in prison, it would be recorded, like I said, she was having such severe stress that she started having these seizures, right? Her body was succumbing to these seizures. I get this. From the original trial, Don and Jennifer Hall would both ask Gary, hey, do you think you should look at the computer? Or like the clock? Or any of the other equipment in the fire? He was like, nah, it's not necessary. Like, I got this, boo. I got this. He would contact the prosecutor's assistant to ask to look at these items and that was seized from the scene. And Gary was told that the items were in the possession of the insurance company for the hospital. And he was like, done. Like, F it. I'm not going to do it anymore. So instead, he decided to focus on the fact that she was nowhere near the fire when it started. That was his premise. So Gary, now she's got that new lawyer, right? Schrammel, I hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly, is referred to as dangerously incompetent, even though he worked on 300 cases and is also the department's only fire investigator. So her new lawyer is like throwing shade, right? He's like, this guy screwed up and this guy screwed up, right? All right. So let's say Matt's onto something. Thermosetting plastics, right? Like Bakelite or polyurethane will harden when they're heated, right? But these aren't the type of plastics that would be difficult kind of to melt. Now, if we go by a computer tray at the desk by the old clock, I presume these would have been made out of more common plastics. You know, people that have around, like high density or low density polyethylenes, which would begin to melt at 130 degrees Celsius or 266 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay. Flames that result from burning plastics may emit a toxic smoke, right? Gases that can cause very serious injuries. Let's play a little devil's advocacy here. If we took a baby bottle, right, we place it into the oven that's been preheated already to 350 degrees, already, right, Fahrenheit, then it would take about 5 to 10 minutes for the milk bottle, right, the tops of it, to melt. If this is a faulty wire from a clock, how did the clock... Like, how did the clock's fire get to the point that it was starting to melt the tray that was on top of the computer to allow it to fall over and hit the garbage can, hit all the papers, and then ignite it into flames of $23,000 of damage? I mean, I did not see any mentions of normal accelerants that someone would use, but what if there was something else used? Do you think Matt's, like, onto something? When he stated, like, oh, to get her out, this is started by this. Do we believe the fire investigator? I mean, I really want you to tell me what you think. I mean, I wish I could get a hold of these photos so you can, like, comment what you think and freeze frame and tell me about it in the comment section. But either way, now we go over to this section. Let's back up again. The fire occurred on January 24, 2001, right? So while the investigation is continuing, Jennifer Ann Hall would begin, a few months later, her work at Hedrick Medical Center in Missouri. from December 2001 until May 2002. Now, remember, she was sentenced in June 2003. During her tenure there, 5 months, the rate of coding would skyrocket after she began working there. Now, coding is what medical professionals refer to cardiac arrest, right? The heart stops. You're clinically dead. The hospital's average for those were like once a year. After Jennifer joined the team, it rose to 18 code blues during her 5-month tenure. 9 of those 18 codes would die, and the other half would achieve ROSC. Remember, again, return of spontaneous circulation. The hospital found out about her arson charges, and they let her go due to the arson charges, not due to any other investigations. Now, Officer Brian Schmidt would state about the rise of cardiac collapses he's like, this is a bit alarming. The hospital officials were also alerted to any particular concerns that seemed to focus Jennifer, right? But they did everything they could in the world to cover it up. At least that's what he would state, and he exclaimed that they were concerned about the bad publicity, at least between him as well as the county coroner, Scott Lindsay, agreed on this. No criminal investigation was launched at the time. So Hedrick Medical Center would be later on bought about a year later by St. Luke's Health System. No, not the St. Luke's that Charles Cullen worked at. But I know, it's got the Cullen vibes about it, right? However, wrongful death lawsuits would be filed in 2010 on behalf of relatives of the 5 patients who died, right? 5 of those patients, not the 9. The Missouri Supreme Court would toss the lawsuit 9 years later in 2019, ruling it was filed after statute of limitations had run out. St. Luke's Health System noted in a statement that it took over operation of Hendrick more than a year after those deaths. All right, okay, we got a couple of things going on. Let's look at the patients. Okay, World War II veteran Charles O'Hara, 88 years old, was admitted for an evaluation of high temperatures like hyperthermia, right? Excessive vomiting, agitation on February 2nd, 2002. 2002. And he would pass away 2 days later, right? There was speculation about retired conservation agent Koval Gan, who was 82 years old. All right, maybe no one's paying attention because they're older, but they should be. But then we get to 37-year-old David Wesley Harper, who was hospitalized battling bronchitis. And when he was admitted to the medical center on March 18th, 2002, nursing staff said they would find Jennifer running up to them like, oh my God, David Harper is sitting on the edge of his bed, and he told me, I don't feel so good, and then just fell backwards and went into complete respiratory arrest. As per the documents, David died. David was found to have unprescribed medications in his system. Specifically, succinylcholine, which has been stated where allegedly was found in Jennifer's pocket. Okay. Getting stranger by the minute. Now we have 49-year-old Shirley Eller was admitted to the hospital due to pneumonia. As well, was going to be discharged because David was going to be discharged as well. And she was going to be discharged the day after, and she would just suddenly collapse and die. March 9th, 2002. David was recovering well from his case, right? He was also going to be discharged, but he dies, right? So we got 2 people who were about to be discharged, and now they're dead, right? But the deaths would be considered as natural causes, even though Shirley's sister, right, Eller, was surprised and said, yeah, my sister smoked, but for other than that, she was pretty healthy and active. Then we have 75-year-old Fern Franco, who was hospitalized with pneumonia. Would also be found dead by Jennifer and another staff member who wants to be unnamed on May 18, 2002. Well, when Fern's tissues were checked, samples, can you guess? Succinylcholine and morphine. Now, succinylcholine is a depolarizing muscle relaxant that has been used for rapid sequence induction and for procedures that would require a brief muscle relaxation. It is a paralytic agent, right? It paralyzes the muscles, like your muscles to breathe. But a respiratory therapist would be aware of those kinds of dangers, right? I mean, medication is used when a patient needs to be intubated, like during general anesthesia. this does not seem to fall under her scope of practice. Actually, paramedics are trained to use succinylcholine to assist the process of endotracheal intubation, right? So they can safely intubate a high percentage of patients while en route during an emergency. Registered nurses are not even permitted to administer this medication. It is within the scope of practice for a certified registered nurse anesthesiast, CRNA. Remember that acronym from my previous case? So succinylcholine should be administered only by medical personnel skilled in the management of artificial respiration, and only when facilities are available for instant tracheal intubation. So again, tracheal intubation and adequate ventilation, right? Which is, right? Okay. Because I just wanted to be as clear as possible, like who's allowed to do what, right? I mean, yeah, there are many institutions that permit respiratory therapists to provide intubation in the event of an emergency or elective procedures, but this is just not something that they can just do based on their diagnosis, because they're not allowed to diagnose. Diagnosing is not within their scope of practice. They assist, but I digress. Morphine, the other medication that was found in the system. Morphine is another commonly abused non-synthetic narcotic that derives from opium, right? China, opium wars, anyone? Okay. That is a CNS depressant, central nervous system suppressant. The problem is documentation. There's a team of people working on each of these patients, and there was no order in the system at all to give those medications to the patient like Fern Franco. How did those drugs get there? I mean, if no one ordered them, I mean, she just find them herself? Like, how'd that happen? All right, that's another weird little factor. Now, I just wanted to go back, and I found an article by Louisiana State Board of Medical Examiners where Robert Maria was reviewing, it's another case, right, just covering what a respiratory therapist can cover, specifically for morphine, and I will quote, the Louisiana State Board of Medical Examiners board reviewed your inquiry as to whether the administration of nebulized morphine is within the scope of practice for respiratory therapists at its meeting of January 17, 2012, and asked that I convey this response. As previously opined, the board states that while it is within the scope of respiratory therapy, as defined by the Respiratory Therapy Practice Act and the board's implementing rules and regulations for a respiratory therapist to administer medications prescribed by a physician. In the board's view, such reference to medication does not contemplate or include anesthetic, like succinylcholine, or sedative agents. More specifically stated, the board does not believe that respiratory therapists as a class are properly qualified by education or training to properly and timely identify or respond to the numerous complications which may be associated with the administration of morphine. Therefore, the board affirmed its opinion that the administration of nebulized morphine, right, nebulizer, right, like the albuterol, right, is not generally within the proper scope of respiratory therapy practice. However, the board does state that a respiratory therapist may administer nebulized morphine pursuant to the prescription and under the direction and supervision of a physician in the immediate presence of the prescribing physician. In short, Jennifer's license does not certify her to handle that medication in any way outside scope or form, especially not even without a physician being physically present. Wow, we got a lot, Jen. We got a lot. Now, as people are starting to investigate, they're looking at the small things, right? They're really looking at the small things. And some of these things you might say, oh, this is evidence that's circumstantial. You can say whatever you want. But the staff is really putting things together. They're like, Jennifer was always in proximity to the patients. She had access to the medications, and she seemed to always be there whenever something was going wrong. She was always the one to notify the staff. Like, oh my God, someone's going into cardiac arrest. She was always there. 3 days later, Jennifer would be placed on administrative leave on May 21st, 2002. She was later fired due to the arson charges, but not due to Fern Franco. So remember, we're in 2023, so this has been going on for a while. Jennifer's attorney, Matt O'Connor, argues she's innocent. She doesn't even have access legally to succinylcholine or morphine or any of those other drugs. Matt would also contest that Jennifer became a scapegoat for the deaths at that medical center because of the arson conviction at that other hospital. Like, she was already cleared up because I cleared her in 2005. So Fern Franco would be kind of the main reason why Jennifer's catching attention, right? Jennifer would actually be charged first-degree murder in March of this year, 2023. When Jennifer was arrested, she was actually arrested under a stolen name called Jennifer Semaboy, and would be also charged for identity theft for that as well. Okay. Records show that she has since been transferred back to Missouri and booked into Livingston County Jail to await her trial. She's being held without bond. Now, I admit, I kind of like, after all this, I'm like, did the coworker that harassed her really die of a heart attack? Or did she do something? I mean, I couldn't find anything, right? I'm just speculating, right? That's all I can do, because I'm just like, kind of weird, had access to stuff, and people are just dying left and right. I mean, 18 codes and 9 dead and 9, managed to achieve ROSC. I mean, from one's perspective, you may wonder, okay, did she start the fire, right? If she did, then, like as Cardi B would say, and don't get me wrong, I'm not actually familiar with her music, but I do think sometimes the way how she talks is a mood for certain quotes. Like, what was the reason? Was this to make herself appear like a superhero and save the day? I mean, those patients with succinylcholine in their system suffocated before their death. The morphine was just the icing on the cake, right? They were awake and aware of what was happening to them and literally could not do anything to stop it. They could not call for help. It takes 4 minutes for permanent brain damage and 4 to 6 minutes for them to die. Did Jennifer just stand there and just watch them die? These deaths occurred 20 years ago. What has been happening in the last 20 years, right? Like, girl, where you been? You just up and killed people. You released from prison in 2005. You only had a hospital job for roughly about 5 months. Did she lay low? Did she straighten her life out after being in prison? Did she realize people look out for these particular things to protect the patient because of Cullen? Did she stop? Where has she worked in the last 15 years? Where's she been? I mean, she still argues that David Harper was not apneic or showing any signs of difficulty in breathing. But the resuscitation team remembers and documents something completely different. And they also told the police that they found David Harper posturing with his hands turned inward on his chest, which is an indication of severe brain damage, indicating David Harper's body had been without oxygen for a substantial period of time. So if she didn't do this, right, as Matt O'Connor says, then you're telling me she stood there as a respiratory therapist, medical professional, and saw indication of a person struggling to breathe and just was like, oh no! Like, how did that go? Like, when they looked back at the hospital records, it was stated that David Harper was actually there because he couldn't tolerate the use of a CPAP. Now, for those who may not know, CPAP is actually an acronym for continuous positive airway pressure. Now, these are like have the mask, and it forms a positive airway pressure ventilation in which a constant level of pressure is greater than the atmospheric, right, what's out here, pressure is continuously applied to the upper respiratory system of a person. When we're breathing, our diaphragm contracts, right? That's our diaphragm, right? It contracts, which opens the lungs, which creates a vacuum. That creates in the lungs, which creates negative pressure, right? So as the lungs vacuum sucks in all the air, the negative pressure in the lungs causes the air to passively flow into the lungs as long as the negative pressure exists. Everything in this planet requires a balance of positive, negative pressure, right? Going back and forth to create a balance. So, like when a person is sleeping, the CPAP machine, right, we've seen them, provides air at that pressure that is basically enough to keep the airway from collapsing. The air is sent through the mask, right? It's sealed with the mouth and nose, and this is what allows a person to breathe without much effort. I mean, the machine's not breathing for you, but it's there to assist, right? Medical team wanted to assess David Harper's tolerance for the BiPAP machine device, right? Which is basically a non-invasive form of the CPAP, essentially. When comparing medical records, it shows that Jennifer's BiPAP flow, right? She's got a little chart. March 21st, 2002, she did mark herself present on the files. She didn't mark herself, right? So that's a requirement, right? If it's not documented, it didn't happen, right? But if she wasn't there, then how does she find the patient not breathing and then be able to run to the emergency team, let them know that she needed help? I mean, did she give herself an alibi by omission automatically just to distance herself from the time and the location of the death? I mean, she was actually there. I mean, people saw her within the last 25 minutes of his death. And yet her last entry was like nearly at midnight when she would take the time to accurately record his dying vitals before allegedly adding that he did not show any signs of apnea, right? Apnea, A for no, and then apnea, no breathing. I want you to leave your thoughts in the comments, because, like, are you in the medical field? How do you feel about this case? Are you a respiratory therapist? And you're like, she's out here ruining our names. Like, I want to know, what additional measures do you think should be added to prevent these kinds of things from happening? I mean, psychological evaluations prior to hiring and random evaluations during their tenure there, not only to evaluate the staff, but also to support the staff as they go through their everyday life. Are staff going to be offended? Like, you think I'm crazy? Like, are people going to get tight about that? Like, and then how do you moderate that? I mean, what are your thoughts on this case? I mean, do you think that she did anything to her coworker, the one who harassed her and died of a sudden heart attack? Because I couldn't find nothing about this dude. I could not find anything. Right? I mean, it's giving Cullen. You know what I mean? It's really giving Cullen. You know? There's so much happening here in this case. Now, here's a real wild kicker, right? So if she really did all this, before I let you go, let me leave you with this last bit of information while she's waiting on trial. Last year, it would unfold that Jennifer Ann Hall would be diagnosed with leukemia and needs chemotherapy. So it's been argued to the judge that she should be set bail due to her illness. Leukemia is a cancer that affects the blood, right? Where the body loses its ability to fight infection. It's completely hindered. Leukemia starts in the inner part of the bones, right? Where the bone marrow is made. You know, it's like, oh, right there. Huh? And frequently moves quickly into the blood, right? Which is how it spreads all over the body. Like, it gets to your lymph nodes, your spleen, your liver, your central nervous system, and other organs, right? Some of the signs of leukemia would include like night sweats, fever, fatigue, and achiness. It resembles flu-like symptoms, right? And instead of getting better after like 2 weeks, you start to have sudden weight loss without having to do anything. Bone and joint pain and easy bleeding and bruising. She now has leukemia. I really want to know what you think, because like this case has got me. It really, really has me, because you got a young graduate, 20-something years old, right? She works at one hospital. Some guy's harassing her. He just drops dead. And then 2 weeks later, a fire starts. Now, sure, the case was appealed, but she leaves that job, right? And they're investigating. Did she start that fire, right? Did she start that fire and or did she not start it? Was she falsely accused of starting that fire? Because I can't help but to wonder, a plastic tray on top of a computer, how that would just ignite to the temperature that it did without an accelerant. And the question is, was there any other presence of any other chemicals that would accelerate it? Any particular medical chemicals that may have been overlooked, right? I mean, Matt O'Connor, he busting his butt on this case. You got her poor parents still working to pay off these legal bills and her medical bills. They are working at Pizza Hut. Oh, Pizza Hut! Just answering phones just to save their little baby girl. Like, girl. Then, while this case is going on, the fire case, we have her working at another medical center. When she appears there's suddenly 18 codes. She was there for 5 months. Hold on, let's do the math on that one. How many weeks is that? So we have 4 weeks in each month. Like, you know what I mean? So it's like, hold on, that's about 20 weeks. I'm assuming the last 2 weeks she probably wasn't even there for the most part. So that means once a week somebody was coding out, falling into cardiac arrest. All right, Matt, maybe I'll buy your story. Maybe she is a scapegoat. Maybe she is. So are you telling me that as a respiratory therapist with all that training during those 5 months that she would see someone struggling to breathe? She would hear them making sounds, seeing their body shriveling up, seeing their body shut down. Now, I don't know if there would be other patients in the room necessarily in that time, and it sounds like there wasn't because each hospital is set up differently. But you mean she sat there and watched the patient for 5 minutes just struggling? Like, I've seen strangers cough, and I'm like, yo, you okay? Yeah? You good? Okay. Just making sure. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so either she's really, really, excuse my language, fucking bad at her job, right? Would see someone struggling with the one thing she specialized to train in, or Matt, she did it. It's a little hard. And then, like, here's my other thing. If she did anything to the coworker, she would have the wherewithal to know what to do to cause this person to have a heart attack. And that's only assuming that they had a heart attack at the hospital, right? That they got sick there. If you know the science behind it, there's a lot of damage you can do. Like the doctor who was getting his patients addicted to narcotics just so he can get sexual favors from them, or the anesthesiast who was using pregnant women to get his blowjobs from while the husbands were out in the other room, and these women woke up either in the middle of it or thought they were dreaming. What do you think? Like, and here's the one good thing. And I hate to say that. Due to Charles Cullen's law, there's a tighter watch in regards to medical staff, right? So did they catch a major serial killer really quickly? And if it wasn't for the arson charges, was she going to be dismissed as easily as Charles Cullen was? Like, we're going to give you a vague paper. Just get out. Because that's really how Charles Cullen got around. No one was really saying anything. They're like, I just don't want to pay the bills. Like, they didn't want to come straight out because they knew there was plenty of lawsuits that would definitely hit that hospital and probably completely devastate it. Would that have happened with her as well? Were they just going to politely dismiss her and then let her be someone else's problem? Would she have been the next Charles Cullen? Do you think she didn't do the fire? Do you think... Because, I mean, some people may want to say, well, maybe when she was in prison, she had all those seizures from being in prison. That's why she killed people. Yeah, but she wasn't sentenced until like a year after she lost the other job. So, where are we at? I mean, I'm going to be watching this case. I'm very, very intrigued on how this is going to go. But that's intense. And then the other question is, how the fuck does she get those medications? She's not even allowed to have those medications. It's not within her scope of practice. She can't just go pop into the pics that's like, pop, 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 boop, saxonocholine. Like, you know what I mean? Like, she's not really supposed to have access. So the question is, how does she get those medications? Does she swipe it off somebody else's card? Does she see a nurse with them? And she was like, bloop. Because it can't be a registered nurse that she would get that medication from, because registered nurses can't even have that medication. You have to be a certified nurse anesthesiast. Right? Registered nurse anesthesiast, CRNA, to have that medication, or a paramedic. And I can't see a paramedic going, oh yeah, you need some? Boop. Like, I just struggle to see that working out. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's a reason why certain things are within someone's scope of practice. There's a reason why everyone's licensed the way that they are, right? And if she took the medication, How did she get it out of the system, right? If she took it from Pixis, if she took it from someone else's truck, who did she take the truck from? Where was the slip of the hand? You know what I mean? Was it an alert? Like, hey, this medication is missing. If anyone sees anything, let us know. I mean, morphine would have just only alerted the fact that maybe there's someone there who's addicted to some sort of narcotic or opioid. But the succinylcholine, that's not your normal, like, no one's going to get high off of that. You're not going to enjoy anything off of that. So, was there an alert for that? Like, hey, this is missing. This is so weird. Had it on my cart. Someone took it. Those patients suffered severely. And really sit there and paint the picture. You're about to get out of the hospital. You're already having problems. You got pneumonias. You're having issues just breathing. And your respiratory therapist comes in with a little notepad and she's like, hold on 1 second. Confirm your name and date of birth. David Harper. Okay. Date of birth. Got it. Great. But she's not really documenting anything. You know, she's just miming the whole thing. Hey, the doctor ordered you this. I may just give this to you. And then does it. And then within that minute, you realize that person is about to murder you. And obviously, I don't see her being able to plan it too far because she would have to get a hold of the medication, right? Or get a hold of it and then hold on to it for dear life. I feel like she's opportunistic about it. And you're sitting there suffocating without anyone holding your throat. You don't even know why this is happening. You don't know what's happening to your body. You don't understand why you're trying to breathe because your brain's going to be like, we need to breathe. Your brain is going to freak out. You know what I mean? Like, your brain does, right? Your life flashes before your eyes right before you die. And it's primarily because your brain remembers situations that it may have gotten you out of, that you survived out of, and it is looking for the answer. And there's no answer for this. That is absolutely cruel. That person is suffocating. And then on top of it, to be given morphine. Okay, maybe physically they're not feeling everything, but you've now suppressed their central nervous system. So now when the response team comes in, they have a less likely chance of achieving ROSC for that patient. You just put the icing on the cake to ensure that person is going to be dead. And that entire time before their body finally gives out, their brain knows the entire time you're just laying there paralyzed, not being able to do anything, even call for help, or even just say she did it. That's fucked up. But anyway, she has leukemia. Stay safe and stay vigilant.